Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to our little podcast. And today we are going to be talking about chores, Patricia. What does it mean? How do we see them? And how does it impact us as individuals and as families, right? Because I think it's super interesting.
I think it is. I think it's an interesting topic. And to celebrate, I'm wearing my apron.
Yeah,
You got your apron
I've
on.
got mine on too.
Yes, nice. So we're in the spirit of things. Just as a side note, I don't really know outside of you really that a lot of people wear aprons. And I have to say, sometimes when people see me in an apron, they really give me a hard time, which
I love my aprons.
I love my apron too. It protects your clothes. It's just, I don't know, it's so much easier. Anyway, side note, but I love an apron. It's awesome. But back to chores. And so I think, why are we talking about this? People might be asking.
Yeah,
But how can we make our everyday chores and what needs to be done something that's maybe more
lighter.
calming,
Yeah.
helpful,
Mm.
reframing it so that it doesn't seem like such a negative thing? Because research is showing that doing household chores can actually be really good for you mentally and emotionally.
Oh, I completely believe that.
Amazing.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
if you think about it, I mean, when you have clutter around, right, it tires you. It literally drains you, right? Because you're constantly walking past it, you're constantly seeing it and thinking, I need to do that,
yeah,
right?
it's taking up mental space.
Yeah.
And so that can really get in the way of trying to do other things, like when you're trying to focus and maybe pay attention to help with your kids' homework or get other things done. And always in
Yeah.
the back of your mind, there's that I have to do this, I have to do that. And that can be really difficult. I read that research is showing that chores, which in and of itself are probably not terribly exciting, but they do provide structure, movement, a sense of accomplishment, and a sense of control. I
Mm.
was really curious about the idea of the sense of control, but sometimes I was reading that when life feels completely out of control or you're overwhelmed, or like sometimes I have these mental blocks, especially if I'm trying to write, go off and do something else because
Oh,
a lot of stuff is very repetitious.
it
And
is.
so it kind of frees your mind to start to wander. And again, when your brain is kind of at a relaxed state, sometimes you're at your most creative.
There's
So,
a talk about the boredom of things, right? And I think, we undervalue these chores. We see them as something negative.
yeah,
And I think, if there's one thing you're going to take away, hopefully, from today is maybe that reframing of a chore, right? It doesn't have to be negative. We can think of it instead as caring for our home, right? I
yes.
think the word in itself, chore, does have this negative notion to it, right? Um, and I feel instead if we kind of looking at it as, yeah, I'm taking care of my home. I'm doing it because I want my home to feel relatively clean and tidy and clutter free. And we're not talking about a house that's being completely, um, disinfected and yeah.
Sure. Yeah, we're not talking that. We're just
That's it.
talking about, getting the stuff done that
Done.
that needs to be done. And
Exactly.
instead of being resentful about it, because being resentful about it doesn't help anybody. Now,
No.
let's kind of side note, right? If you're have had a really busy day at work, and let's say you have kids and there's so much going on, especially when they're little, right? I'm sure it can feel like all you're doing is cleaning. And so I'm sure there's going to be people who are watching this going, yeah, what the
Uh,
hell do you know? All I do is clean. There's nothing fun about it. And I'm sick to death. I'd like to take a day where I don't have to do anything. Fair enough, right? But trying to reframe it so that it is a place to maybe relax your mind. Like you said, you're looking after your family and just that's could even be considered a timeout. Like if you're looking from a self-care point of view,
oh,
it's a bit of a timeout of relaxing my brain, and I'm just going to do these things and go from there.
And often, if we are stressed as well, a lot of research shows that, because a lot of our work now today is mental, right? It's that mental load. We sit in front of our computers and we're expected to be like these other computers, we're just expected to produce and produce and produce. Um, I think if we, again, reframe it and think of it as this is a moment when you're doing chores, you're using your hands. And when we use our hands, there is, a school of thought that says it's very difficult for your brain to then be stressed when you're doing things with your hands, right? It actually helps to reduce the mind stress and that kind of, if you're doing a task that you're not always used to doing, you have to focus on what you're doing. And so therefore you're not thinking about the stresses in your life, right?
Oh. It's kind of like I really can't do two things at one time.
This is it, right? And we can't. Like,
Oh, I hadn't
we can't
thought
do
of it from that point of view, but now that I am thinking about it, yeah.
right? So if you're doing something with your hands, you're less likely to start, if there's something that was bothering. So like you were saying, if something's difficult, go do something else. And I actually do that sometimes. I can't be doing this anymore. I'm like, I'm just going to give myself 15 minutes and I'm going to go downstairs and I'm going to tidy up those things that have been bugging me because then I know that's done. And often while I'm doing it, I'll be like, oh, maybe I'll take a step forward in the right direction with the problem I was dealing with, or I've come up with another solution, or so again, they're not negative. I think it's, and as you said, if you're a young mum, yes, we hear you. It's, you're not going to suddenly turn your whole day around, but maybe taking one of those chores. And it's that ripple effect too, right? If your children see you approaching it in that manner, then hopefully with time they'll approach it in the same way,
I agree with that. I think it's
right?
also a sense of accomplishment.
Oh,
There's it's someone from the army. It's quite a famous speech that was given at a graduate class by some general or something. This is a number of years ago. But one of the comments on this speech was, when you get up in the morning, make your bed.
hmm.
Because if everything else goes to crap during the day, you've accomplished something. And actually, I think that's so true. If nothing is working out, finish the laundry,
100%. Yeah.
wipe the counter, like do something. And at least it's like, okay,
I've
I've
done that.
accomplished something
Yeah.
today. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. I remember during COVID, like when it first happened and people would just like we were all stressing out, right? I remember saying to the kids, I'm like, no matter what happens, let's all get dressed in the morning. Like, I don't care what you're doing, change out of what you slept in.
Yeah.
You can
You're
still wear
not sitting around in pajamas all day.
right all day long.
Yeah.
Like, no, I want you to change out of something. And I'm not saying like that we did it all the time, but I think most of the time because it made, again, it's that mental like, okay, I'm not sleeping anymore. Okay,
The
I'm
mental shift of
right.
now I'm awake and I'm doing something and
Yeah, was huge.
go
And
forward.
even for myself, there were days I just didn't want to, but I'm like, when I did it, I felt better for it. Was it a great day? Maybe not, but at least it was better, like you just said, right? It was better than had I not done it.
Correct.
And
You brought up kids earlier, and so that whole debate, and I
oh,
have had kids, you would know, but do we teach our kids to do chores, age appropriate chores,
yes,
not
slave labor.
not slave labor, age appropriate chores? And the answer, again, research on that is saying yes, age appropriate, because it teaches them a whole bunch of things, which I thought was so interesting. It gives them a sense of responsibility. It makes them feel like they're a valued member of the family because they are contributing to the caregiving of the family home.
Yes.
Um, I also found that, again, a sense of responsibility. Um, so it's all really, really important things. And research showed that when kids consistently did chores when they were young, there is some research out there that says they actually do better later on in life. Like they have more resilience, better life skills.
Well, this is it. And I think it's what we need to remember when when we're teaching, whether you have your own children or nephews and nieces that come and stay, and, you know, we're a family, we work together as a unit. Obviously, as they're young, like we said, you need to find age appropriate things, but everybody can help out, whether it's setting the table, whether it's unloading the dishwasher, whether it's, it could be a variety of things, even just taking clean laundry upstairs, right? A small,
Right.
I mean, you wouldn't get a 3-year-old to take a big basket of laundry up, but you could still
Age
get them to
appropriate,
put
age.
away the knives and forks, right? I don't know, whatever your kid likes or doesn't. But they do get, I think we undervalue how much kids like being part of things. And if they have a responsibility, they do, they love it. They're like, oh, I can do this now because they're all about learning. And
They
so if we encourage that and then it just becomes,
creates creates resilience
yeah,
too,
it
right?
does.
Because if they're, let's say, trying to fold a towel and they can't quite, it just becomes a lump. That can be really frustrating because they can't figure out how to do this. And so as you teach them how to fold a laundry, you're creating resilience because they're problem solving, they're working through the learning steps, and they're figuring it out. And then this whole huge sense of accomplishment at the end
That
and
it's
that
actually,
feeling,
I did it, right?
yeah, I did it, and I'm important to this family because look at, these things that I can do and I can contribute to that sense of family.
Especially when you're little, you're often told, oh, you're too small, or no, you can't do that, right? When you want to try and do certain things, and I think that can be quite frustrating as a child. So if you are given things that you can do, you're like, great, I love doing it. Let me show off and kind of, show them how well I can do this, right? It's nice. I think it's great.
I think it's great. So people, I think, agree with us or disagree with us, and probably most, like, especially if you're crazy busy and you've got kids, it's like, yeah, whatever. But from an emotional and mental point of view, trying to, we have to do it anyway.
We
So
have to do it. Yeah.
find a way to do it so that you feel supported, that you're doing something that's important, that is actually really about your self-care because you're getting rid of that mental clutter, you're getting stuff done, you're taking care of your home. And this goes out for men and women because we've mentioned a lot about moms, but you know what?
Do. Dads are involved in
Yeah,
this too.
dads are doing lots. We don't mean to be saying that moms are the only ones who do anything. It's the
That's
dad
very true. It's a good point, Patricia. It's a very good
and
point.
stuff too. And so everybody is a family getting in and taking care of things. And so I think the message here is if you can reframe it.
Yeah. And
Um,
one last point we were talking of is, if people don't understand why or don't see it, they won't do it, right? So sometimes it's a question of just taking a few minutes to get that chore done and explain to them why you're doing it. Like, this is, can you see this here? Because sometimes if they've never done it before, they will just walk past it.
yeah,
Right? And they literally mentally won't register it. So if you just take them a couple of times and help them to mentally register it, then they will actually pick up on that chore when they see it next, right? So we can't expect people to see it if we've never spoken to them about it. Although it may seem blindingly obvious, literally, it is not.
that's such a good point because it's not only teaching them, do that because I said so, but why
Yeah.
is this important to the functioning of the family household, right? And just as a funny story, because you had mentioned recycling earlier
Yes.
when we were talking privately. And so my husband, I have talked him through the whole recycling thing. I don't know, I'm sure 1,000 times. Yeah, it's not happening. Anyway, I just recognize that that's gonna be my thing. And I think it's just he just doesn't want to go there. It's just,
I suppose so.
yeah, I
Not
don't
very
want to, I
good.
just don't want to do that. Like, so I'm just never gonna learn about this.
Maybe we can find something else then. It's like,
Well, yeah, and I'm okay with that. Like there's certain things that, I don't do either. And it's just, no, that's your job.
that's it.
So you can separate those, and that's fine too. But it's all in the good of the household and managing things. So we hope that you got something out of that and can look at things in a lighter, brighter, more empowering way. And if you have
Less stressful, we hope.
less stressful, if you have any comments that you would like to make, we'd love to hear them. And if you know of anybody who might need this message, forward this one.
We
All
would
right.
so appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay. We wish everybody a great day. Take care.
Bye.